Hey Saber fans, this is Adam from Blue for Sabers. So welcome to the very first Saber building tutorial. So this is Let's Build a Saber. So if you came here, assuming that you're interested in building a Saber or you're just curious. So the reason I wanted to create this tutorial to get a little starter here is because I wanted to give back to the community. I learned building sabers through watching videos, chat rooms. About 5 years ago I started building sabers, and it was a little tougher back there to find information, but now with it becoming more popular over the years, it's definitely easier to find info. But these tutorials are meant to be in a clear and concise step process I wanted to create. A lot of information is kind of spread all over the place. People have ways of doing things that just don't work out, maybe for others. So hopefully the way that I've come up to create my sabers and to build them will maybe help you down the road. So part one of this series of tutorials and videos will be going over the tools of the trade. So in every trade or hobby, there are tools that you'll be using to do the job and to make it easier. Some things over the years I've kind of thrown out the window, I don't need, and then others I picked up and found more use out of them. So we'll go over those tools that you'll need, definitely some essentials obviously to start building. So without being too winded, let's jump right into it, and we'll start going over some of the tools that you'll need. So definitely what you want to look for, and I'll post all these tools down in the description of what you'll need, the essentials, is you're going to need to be able to solder. So one of the best soldering tools and soldering irons I've used, now this would probably be the third one that I've purchased, and I really like this one here. This is the Hakko FX888D soldering iron. You see there? So that one is good. It is ESD safe, so that will protect your electronics from electromagnetic shock. That's very important because you don't want to be having any tool that will cause any additional damage to your delicate electronics. That is the Hakko FX888D. So it comes with this soldering tip here. So this is actually something else that I picked up over time, is the soldering tip itself. I was using in the past a very thin tip. Get this to focus here. You can see there, this is a little bit fatter tip. So you would think with some of the electronics that you're soldering, it would be tougher to use this fatter tip, but honestly it doesn't, because the reason why is because this tip heats up a bit faster, and it holds the heat more at the end here compared to a very thin tip. So you can heat up the pad a little bit faster and easier. It spreads that solder a little bit easier too. And you can always use the flat side if it's a little bit bigger soldering joint, or you can kind of rotate it. If it's a little bit thinner, you can use the smaller side, like the tip here on the edge. So it's a great tool for both jobs. So this is one of the tips I used in the past. So you can see the difference in how thin that is. It's definitely a little bit harder to solder with, I found. So I like the fatter tip. So that is definitely a trick that I found over time. Also with that soldering iron, you can adjust the temperature. I like to keep it at 700 degrees. That's what I found that works best with all the electronics. I pretty much just set it at that, but you can adjust it up and down. We'll just stay at that, and we'll go up to that level when you're ready. So definitely the other thing you're going to need is to clean off your soldering iron tip, and we'll go into the details of that later on in another video of how to tin your soldering tip and your wires and your board. Definitely this is an absolute key component that you'll need. Some people like to use a little wet sponge to clean off their soldering tip. Actually comes with this, with the Hakko soldering iron. I never used it. I prefer this better. It's easy to open up, just pop off the bottom here, and then all the little extra soldering bits that get dropped off from the soldering iron, you can empty it out and clean it super easy. I've had this for 4 years now. No need to change it, and it works perfect. You're definitely cleaning your soldering tip quite a bit. Definitely something else you're going to want is wire snips, and to strip off the insulation of your wires. Definitely a couple different options out there. Some people like the ones where you just kind of clip the wire. I prefer these over them, and when you get it more into tight spaces, I prefer the way this kind of strips the insulation off there. And you can see up here at the top, you see the 30, that's the 30 gauge wire. The AWG is the solid, and then on the right side here is the stranded. You're pretty much just, there's ones that, so if you go to like your Lowe's or your Home Depot, you're probably not going to find ones that go down to the 30 AWG gauge. They usually start a bit higher up. So you usually have to go online to buy these, or to maybe a hobby store might sell them. I believe I bought this one on Amazon. Also, this is about 5 years old, is the original one I had. They pretty much don't dull or anything like that, so you know, this is a one-time kind of purchase, unless you bust it or something like that. But so it has all the gauges, that all the common ones you're going to be using there, from 30 up to 20. They'd be using for building your saber. So that I consider essential. So this doesn't have to. This is just to be able to snip your wire or any other things you might want to cut. This usually comes with a soldering iron if you get a little set or something like that. These aren't too expensive, just a few bucks. This isn't necessary, but I like it because I like the sharp tip, and you can kind of get into tight spots to be able to snip some things off, or to just cut your wire. You can also use scissors for that as well, but I prefer these. They're just a little more convenient, and for a few bucks, why not have it? So another essential you're going to need is some solder itself. This is a Rosin core flux solder, and actually let me get you the size of this. I forget off the top of my head. So I buy this in pretty decent spools, because you'll go, as you use it more, you'll go through it quite a bit. So I just started buying big spools of it. I don't remember what this cost offhand, but it wasn't too expensive. And then I just pull off quite a bit of it, and then I just kind of roll it up, and I use that as the piece for my soldering. But it just comes in this big spool here. This will last for quite some time. You can see that it comes with the 2% flux, and the diameter is 0.8 millimeters. I find that's a good size to get onto the joints. It's small enough. You don't want to get any bigger than that, because you'll have a hard time getting onto some of the small joints. You kind of want the solder diameter to be not too much bigger than what the actual soldering pad is on your board. So that's a good size that I found, so I've been using that ever since. Another essential thing, now there's a couple of different options that you have with your helping hands. I like these. You can adjust them. This actually came with a magnifying glass on here. I took that off because I don't use it. It definitely helps with some smaller areas that you're soldering, but I like these helping hands. These are my original ones. You can see how they're a little rusty in spots, but they still work. You can tighten these, loosen these. They're pretty convenient. I like what I like with these is that you can really get it close to your surface. Some of the other ones you really got to stretch down, and they kind of get in the way and stuff like that. I like these, how it comes low to the surface. That's where I like to solder. I don't like to solder up in the air. I kind of like to solder where my electronics are going to be, and where I can kind of fit it into the saber itself. The only thing with these is they are metal, so I like to use a little heat shrink, and I heat shrink the ends of it just so these clips don't kind of bite into the wires as much. And I'll just change those out probably about every month or 2 months. As they get worn down, I just cut another little piece and heat shrink it on there. But definitely something that is helpful, as in the name helping hand, so that I would recommend having. It's a great way to hold your electronics, hold your wires, so you can join your wires together or with your resistors or whatnot. Another essential is going to be your wires itself. Now there's definitely different types of wire that you can get. Let me pull out a different kinds here. So this is a 30 gauge. I like to write my gauges on the side, just as convenience, so I can grab them because I have a ton of different wires over here. So this is the difference in this is also a 30 gauge. I have found over time that I prefer this silicone, which is the blue. So you'll see here, this is a little more rigid, this outer coating on this wire. This is a Remington Wire is the company. When you're trying to squeeze this into hilts, it can tend to bind up in there and snap the joints. But I found that the silicone wire, and this is actually also easier to strip, I found that the silicone wire is easier to work with. It's almost like a wet noodle, like a piece of spaghetti. So it's definitely more flexible. As you can see, it doesn't kink as the other one would kink, and you definitely don't want that because you could break the wire inside. But this is kind of like a wet noodle, so it has a lot of flexibility, what you want when you're trying to definitely squeeze it in tighter hilts. The only downfall of this is that it's a thicker outer coating around the wire, so it does create a little more diameter, but I think that having the flexibility and the wire is definitely more important than that slight diameter change. The other thing too with wires is you're definitely going to want different gauges. So depending on the voltage that you're pushing through your LEDs or through your battery, you're definitely going to want different voltages to be able to be pushed, so you're going to need a thicker gauge wire. So this is a 22 gauge, so you can see that this is definitely thicker than the other one. Let me pull out that 30 gauge. This is actually a 24, so this is even a little bit thicker than that one. So you can see the slight difference. There's not too much difference in that, but when you step down to the 30 gauge, there is definitely a difference in size, especially when you start to tack these up into different sizes. When you get into your recharge ports, also will be covered in a later video of how to properly wire a recharge port. You're definitely going to see the difference in thickness when they're all bound up. But you want to use the proper voltage, wire gauge for the voltage, because you want to have a good brightness to your blade, to your LED, and you don't want to overheat your wires as well. So, and we will also go over that in a later video as well. So that covers about wires here. Another very important thing, and these come in packs, is you definitely want all these variations in sizes of heat shrink. These are just a couple of examples. I cut off pieces. They come in longer pieces of this, but there are definitely a whole bunch of different diameters, colors, sizes of heat shrink. This one's a little big. Don't use that one too much. But the ones I definitely use a lot are probably this size right here, this one, this clear one, the green one, and this size right here. Now the reason you want to use heat shrink is because you want to be able to protect your ends, your joining wires, for any shorts, and it also gives it a little more extra strength at the joints. So you definitely want to have a whole bunch of different sizes of heat shrink. Some people like to heat shrink their boards, or at least the ends of them where the joints come in. There's a little extra protection, a little extra strength too, especially if you're taking the chassis inside and out of the Saber quite a bit. But heat shrink, definitely a must-have. People who don't use any heat shrink, I don't know, but you definitely should be. So this is not a necessity. but is definitely something that I would recommend. It is super cheap, not expensive. So this is great for testing your LEDs. I like to test my LEDs before I wire them up, make sure they all work. I use a lot of red, green, and blue RGB, so you get all the cool color mixes with like the CFX, for example. So this is a great tool. Just a couple alligator clips. You have your negative and your positive. You have two AAA batteries, so it gives just enough voltage just to light it. All you're doing is lighting it for a second just to make sure they work. Because there has been a couple of times where I have wired up an entire Saber. I go to fire up and one of the LEDs does not light. And that is a true pain to take it all apart and to redo it again. So if you can skip all of that hassle and do a quick test with this alligator clip and battery here, it will save you a lot of headache. So that is definitely a tip I have learned over the years, and that is a must. So also too, before I get too far, is with going back to the wires, I would highly recommend getting different colors. So they usually come in boxes where they come with different colors. You can get brown and yellow and white and black and green and purple. I would recommend getting a couple different variations of colors, and the reason for that is when you're wiring it up and you have the wires running down the blade, you can create a little diagram for yourself and say like black goes to your battery, green goes to the ground on the board, purple goes to your switches. So it just makes it a lot easier to be able to figure out what goes where, and it makes your life that much easier. So definitely recommend getting a couple different colors so you're not using all the same ones. So these tools are not a necessity. I find them very helpful, especially when you're trying to maybe hold a wire in a tight spot, or hold the board, or try to pull something through, maybe a chassis or your wires through a tight area where you can't get your fingers. I primarily use this more blunt needle nose pliers here, or whatever you want to call them, but so I use these a lot. Definitely helpful and useful. And then I have these as well. I have a couple of different ones where they're angled, but these are definitely the ones I primarily use over all of them. So definitely helpful, not a necessity, but it will also save yourself a lot of headache. So going into just a couple of extra tools here. A knife. This is an Xacto knife. The Exacto Knife is helpful if you need to trim down small areas, maybe to fit a switch in a certain area, or to cut off a little piece of something. It could be various things. It always is helpful to have some kind of small knife. You could have a small razor blade. I like the Exacto knives because they're very sharp and they have a small point, but you have these little knives too. Just little tools that come in handy when you're saber building. Always nice to have, and so trying to go around and look for it. Another thing, I try not to use too much of this, but some electrical tape. Great way to hold wires together temporarily as you're trying to twist them together. You can hold down a board or something like that, but electrical tape is always something nice to have around. So I would recommend having that as well. I also have this Kapton Tape here. I think I said it right, but this is a anti-static tape. This is great for small electronics. You can also use it to hold down your board to your chassis, or something like that, but this is great to have. Also not too expensive, that lasts forever as well. So a couple of other little tools that you might need. Some super glue. Some super glue will get you to, some people like to glue down their boards, or they like to glue in their switches. I prefer not to do that because I always try to think ahead down the road in case something breaks. you know, and if you have it super glued in there, it's becomes a real pain to try to be able to get it out. So I try to stay away from super gluing my switches in or my board down. I like to use a little bit of that tape to hold it down, but I will use this to hold maybe the end of my leather wrap on the grip. I'll use a little bit of that on the ends, and we'll go over leather wrapping later on in another tutorial as well, so don't worry about that. I have a technique that I use that I learned a couple years back, and I think it works great. They were using it, I learned it from somebody who was using it to wrap, I think it was a hatchet handle with a leather wrap, and I really liked the way he did it, so I stuck with that technique and have used it ever since. So I will show you that one in the future tutorial. So something else, I think this is a necessity, is a hot glue gun. This is a rather large hot glue gun. It has two temperatures, a 60 watt and a 100 watt on this one, so you have a higher and a lower temp. But hot glue is great for holding a switch in underneath. I like to put just a tiny dab of hot glue in there. That is a temporary but permanent fix to holding in your recharge board or switch. Also, it's a great way to maybe hold down a couple wires so they're not swinging around at all, or I like to put a little hot glue on the corner of my speaker connectors so there's no chance of getting it touching the side of the hilt. So hot glue is a great way for some easy fixes, and it's a great thing that you can pull it off too, so it's not a permanent thing like a super glue is. So going a little bit beyond your essential tools, just one more tool, if I can fit this into the camera here, is kind of large. I like these vices too. They have smaller vices as well. I like this for be able to hold my chassis when I'm soldering something in, or some wires, or the speaker or something like that. Not an essential, but definitely something that is useful. Another tool, I know we're going over quite a few, but there are some things that you definitely need, and this is one of them. So this is thermal tape. You can see on the back side here, it's kind of a slightly sticky, and then you pull off this white film on top and it's sticky on the other side, so that will be attached to, say, an LED to hold that down, and that will spread out the heat from the LED. They do get quite hot as they run, so you definitely want some kind of thermal tape. Some people use thermal paste. Thermal paste is a little messy, and I prefer you to use that tape instead because it doesn't get all over my LED. If I need to change it or switch it out, I prefer that thermal tape, so that is definitely something that you want to use on your LEDs. So one more thing kind of off the tools. I think I pretty much covered all the tools that you would need to be able to do a build, but something a little off that's helpful to me that I would recommend getting is a clipboard. And the reason for that is because I like to keep all my diagrams for all my boards. I have one going several years back, all the way back to the boards I would pull out of my Hasbro Sabers and use, to the Prism boards, to the Saber Forge boards, Nana Biscotti's, CFX, Profi. So this is my chart for all my different wiring, because you know, as you do them over the years, or you stick with a certain board, like I stick with the CFX right now at this present time until something new comes out. You know, you forget on how things are wired, so it's a great reference as I go to wire something different. I'll reference my, I guess, little manual here, or wiring diagram, and then, you know, I won't make any mistakes and have to change anything out. So definitely a quick little tool that I found is very useful and convenient to have. I kind of hang it right in front of me up on my wall, and then I can kind of switch it out if I need to. So that is pretty much all the tools, and I'm kind of finishing up part 1 here of your building tutorial. It's pretty dry and straightforward, but definitely some information that maybe hasn't been covered in other tutorials or videos you have watched. So hopefully this was helpful. I know it would have been for me back in years when I was looking for information. It would have been great to have all the tools laid out for me, so I know exactly what I need to get. So I hope that was helpful. Come back for part 2. We'll be going over actually how to start getting into your Saber and building it up from wiring your LED to your switches to your recharge ports, and then going forward from there. So come back for part 2, and we'll see you later.